Mr. Kasparov, we meet just a few days after the tragedy of Krasnogorsk, near Moscow, the terrorist attack. What does this tragedy tell us about the state of the Russian state? I mean, many people say that it's no longer an authoritarian state, it's almost a totalitarian one, so one would expect actually that tragedies, terrorist attacks like this one, would not happen in a truly authoritarian or totalitarian state, but it did happen, so what's wrong?
Nothing is right about totalitarian state. Putin's Russia is a fascist dictatorship that is at the last stage of this kind of regime when it attacks neighbors and it makes war as an engine to preserve power. It's a bit too early to draw the conclusions about this attack, but considering that Putin and his cronies had very similar methods to come to power 25 years ago, so we have to look first at them as the culprits. So I say that if you have a serial killer in town and something happens, you should look at this killer and his gang as a first suspects. There are many things in this story that that do not make sense. The official story presented by Russian authorities is just, it doesn't work. According to them, terrorists spent something like 13 minutes in the building. That's not enough to make all the killings and also to start a fire. Fire that started officially on the bottom of the building in the ground floor, and within 1 hour went up to the roof. So this something doesn't work. Plus, we have now few video reports about very suspicious men in the same jeans and blue sweaters in the audience. Again, we cannot say that this is how they planned it, but I can bet my bottom dollar that even if it was ISIS, and even if the same Tajiks, though again it's doubtful, that have been eventually apprehended, it was definitely part of this KGB operation to boost patriotic feelings. Because 2 days before the event, Shoigu talked about new mobilization. A day before, Peskov said war. First time the Putin official said war. So they need, to change the mood of people in Moscow. Moscow has been spared from mobilization, and St. Petersburg as well. So Putin always looked for depressed regions or for national republics, Buryatia, Tuva, Chelyabinsk, Kurgan, not Moscow. Now he needs recruits from Moscow, and I think that was a part of their mechanism of spreading terror and fear, and actually don't care what people think about it. And of course, they immediately blamed Ukraine. With zero evidence. Yeah, that's right. But I can bet you that soon that you will see the screenshot on the internet allegedly coming from Ukrainian embassy in Dushanbe, hiring this Tajik. So you always have to ask the classical Cicerone question: cui bono? Who is benefiting from that? Benefits are huge. Many Western media is now no longer looking for Ukraine. They look at this Moscow tragedy. They talk about solidarity and a joint fight against terror. So Putin had benefits both internationally and domestically. So that's why, considering his record, I think it's safe to say that he definitely had his fingerprints all over this crime. So
what reaction do you expect? I mean, reaction of the Russian society? Because, some people may say, well, it's consolidation, but we may also see, young men actually escaping Moscow just and emigrating to countries, Georgia, on Middle East.
This is the most painful issue for people like me, because we have been arguing that it's time for the West to recognize that they have to change the narrative, because Putin succeeded convincing Russians that it's a war of Russia against the West. And we have to prove the otherwise.
You think he did convince?
Absolutely. It's for many Russians, even pro-Western Russians, they see it as a conflict where they have no choice but to stay with Putin. So we have to prove that it's not a war against Russia, but against Putin's Russia, against Putin's regime. Which means you have to offer some opportunities for people that are willing to cut ties with Putin's regime, like myself and my colleagues, to run away. And that's a plan which I call Russian Taiwan, to start creating Russian matrix of Russian world outside of Russia, among people who say war is criminal, regime legitimate, Crimea is Ukraine, war criminals must be brought to justice, Russia has to pay Ukraine the reparations. People who are willing to say no more Putin, as long as Putin stays there, we want to live elsewhere. And that might be a big game changer, because unless you have a Russian component in this war against Putin, against Putin's fascism, the war cannot be won.
Okay, but at the same time, well, we see, and after the Russian aggression in Ukraine, that many people just, flee from Russia. I mean, not hundreds, but not politically active people, but basically regular Russians, young men, they simply escape Russia. So would you expect after, this situation, more people actually expect standing behind the Putin?
Many would like to flee, but the question is, even if you fly out of Russia, you need travel document. The problem is that if you travel with Russian passport, you cannot open bank account, you cannot get residence permit. Being Russian is a curse these days. So what is very important is to make sure that people who are willing to sign the declaration denouncing Putin and cutting ties will get some kind of a travel document. So they will be able to move to a new Russia. Yes, a lot of people would like to leave now. And the key is that, people who are willing to leave, this is the intellectual elite, people who are actually now engaged in war efforts. You cannot destroy Putin regime by sanctions. You cannot easily win the war on battlefield, but brain drain. This is how the free world.
It's already happening. Many IT.
They have to go back. But again, the passport expires. They have to go back to Russia. Okay. Many of them, unfortunately, have to go back. So we have to secure the passage. So it says I already talked to many political leaders in mostly Eastern and Central Europe, but it still depends on the strategy. The free world, led by America, is yet to say Ukraine must win, Putin must lose, and we have to do everything to design a strategy to win this war. So we're still waiting for that. And millions of Russians who I believe I can represent, not 140 million, many of them support Putin, but those who would like to be part of this global coalition against Putin's fascism, we owe them a chance.
But what is your definition of the victory when it comes to war in Ukraine?
It's very simple. So in the declaration of Russian Action Committee that I create with Michael Khodorkovsky, it states very clearly: restoration of Ukrainian borders back to 1991, all the way down to Sevastopol, reparations paid for the damages, and bringing war criminals to justice.
But it's a great idea. But you look, what's going on the ground. With the Ukrainian offensive, which didn't go as good as it was expected to go. It seems to many experts and observers, even military people, that there is no way that either side can, win this war. That
Ukrainian offensive failed not because of Ukrainians were not brave enough, because Americans didn't want them to win, because the amount of weapons submitted to Ukraine was a laughing stock. It was a joke. So the fact is that Russian Kerch Bridge that connects Crimea and a Russian mainland is still there, with so many missiles, Germans or Americans, that could have destroyed it. The Ukraine still has no F-16s. It doesn't have long-range missiles. It had very few tanks. So Ukraine has not received enough weapons. North Korea gave more shells to Russia than the entire Europe to Ukraine. So, as somebody who used to play chess, I can tell you, before you win the game, you have to lay down the strategy. Yeah. And the strategy starts with the goal. And the goal must be Ukraine must win. That's how you say that. Not as long as it takes, not all sorts of ambiguities. Simple, straightforward message. The moment it's being done, we see the change of situation, because America and Europe have enough resources to win the war. But they have to recognize Ukraine wins, Putin loses, Russia may collapse. It's a new geopolitical situation. But you should stop being afraid of Putin loss and as a consequence the dissolution of Russia, because if Putin, God forbid, wins, the consequence will be much worse.
And you think that Western leaders are afraid of Putin losing the war?
Absolutely.
Why?
That you should start asking Mr. Biden and others, but it's very clear from what they have been doing and what they've been saying, they're still looking for a way to find a compromise. There's no compromise with fascism. You cannot compromise with cancer. You have to cut it off.
But I think it's about Putin, or it's more about Russia? The fear is about Russia, that actually this day we have Putin, then if we don't have Putin...
It's Russian history that is the major military and geopolitical defeat always led to the reforms. I think it's time to burn the Russian Empire. Russian Empire caused so many trouble for neighbors, for the world, and also for Russians. So it's time to start anew. But you have to take this responsibility. Unfortunately, the free world is led by managers, not statesmen. We're still missing Churchill, Roosevelt, Adenauer, de Gaulle. Instead, we have people that are afraid of their own shadows.